you'll see that Lombard's self-selected group of top economists, including 4 Nobel laureates, is countered by another self-selected group of top economists, including 6 Nobel laureates, which conclude, amongst other things, quote, "There are many potential policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for which the total benefits outweigh the total costs. For the United States in particular, sound economic analysis shows that there are policy options that would slow climate change without harming American living standards, and these measures may in fact improve U.S. productivity in the longer run." So I wouldn't use Lombard because it's pretty much canceled out by the Economist statement on climate change. In fact, if you wanted to count up, the Economist got 6 Nobel laureates to Lombard's 4. So he doesn't help us much with our calculation in the upper left-hand corner. It is worth noting that the Economist statement on climate change, the 6 Nobel laureates included, say that action would actually be good for the economy, which is an argument I've heard a lot of individuals make. Things like energy efficiency saves money, early pioneers in the industry make the big money, and so on, which is food for thought, but still doesn't help us with our expected value calculation. And I know I said that let's not take into account the range of possible consequences in a box, so that we're just looking for the disaster scenarios. But I did find something interesting along the lines of action having positive rather than negative effects on the economy. USCAP, that group that includes all those heavyweight companies like Shell and Ford, says some surprising things in their document. Most notably, in our view, the climate change challenge, like other challenges our country has confronted in the past, will create more economic opportunities than risks for the U.S. economy. The emphasis is mine, and I also paraphrased the following points, which you can look up to see if I did a conscientious job. USCAP believes that action on climate change will create new markets, will result in increased U.S. competitiveness, reduced reliance on foreign sources of energy, resulting in increased energy security, improved balance of trade, and world leadership for the U.S. These guys make that upper left-hand box sound like a party. What a deal! Reduce the chance of global catastrophe and get paid to do it? Sign me up! But wait, if it's such a good deal, if you can cut emissions and not pay a cost, then how come not all businesses are doing it yet? Look, change is hard for all of us, okay? There's a reason the phrase business as usual is used to refer to not being innovative or seeking to improve. It's easier that way. Plus, that question sort of assumes that businesses are all-knowing, doesn't it? That if businesses aren't doing things a better way now, then that must be because a better way doesn't exist? That it never takes time or pressure to come up with better ways of doing things? That necessity isn't the mother of invention, but just a distant cousin? Sometimes a prod is useful. In 2002, BP committed to cutting its own CO2 emissions by 10% over 10 years to get good publicity. At the time, they calculated that they could do it at no net dollar cost and would get great publicity, so they went for it. Well, now they say it's going to end up saving them, get this, $650 million through energy efficiency, all because they wanted to cut emissions for publicity and figured it wouldn't cost them anything. They made money. That's cool. And it shows that the dire warnings of the economic doomsayers are really starting to look pretty flimsy. Along those lines of flimsy economic doomsday scenarios, here's another thing I turned up that I wanted to share as you're making your own evaluation of the predictions of economic doom and gloom that the hardline skeptics so often seem to resort to. Google this, backgrounder number 1229, and you'll get the Heritage Foundation's commentary on a 1998 Department of Energy report about the economic impacts of the Kyoto Protocol. The DOE report, by the way, was one of the documents that Professor McKittrick actually sent to me. The Heritage Foundation's article is subtitled More Bad News for Americans, and their lead economic consequence, the biggest, scariest impact that they could find in that whole report, and they chose to highlight to warn the reader of the, quote, devastating economic consequences, end quote, their words, was, if we followed the Kyoto Protocol, by the year 2010, a gallon of gasoline could cost as much as $1.91. I had to laugh. I mean, to be fair, there's lots of other numbers in there, but that's the scariest thing they could dredge out of the whole report. And they repeated it 3 more times. Given that they're always calling the people who advocate action on climate change chicken littles, you just gotta appreciate the irony. What wasn't a laughing matter, however, was how deviously manipulative that article was. It was supposedly about the DOE's report, but woven in with the mild quotes from the DOE report were quotes from a nationally recognized econometric firm, which were the ones predicting dire consequences. The carefully crafted message that the casual reader takes away is that the heavyweight DOE report predicted harsh economic consequences from the Kyoto Protocol, something that simply wasn't true if you looked at the actual report. I take the time to relate this to you in order to underscore the importance of evaluating your sources. That heritage stuff was downright slimy. Look it up. Yet another rosy economic view of the upper left box by a heavyweight economist is the Stern report to the British government, which says this up here will cost about 1% of GDP, but this would cost 20% of GDP. So try as I might, I just couldn't find a credible economic disaster scenario for this box. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Maybe you'll find one and send it to me, but I think you'll at least agree that I tried to be as conscientious as possible in looking for one. But really, turns out I didn't need to do all that looking, and you didn't need to do all that listening these last few minutes, because here's a point that makes the severity of the economic costs up here moot anyway. Think of it this way if you'd like. The main idea of those who warn that the negative consequences up here are worse than the negative consequences down here is that government spending and regulation would be bad for the economy. Now, for the moment, let's not debate that. Let's just simply accept that thesis. Now, imagine this scenario here. We take action on a nebulous threat, but we have time to do our best to ease the restrictions into place in a planned and thoughtful manner to minimize the chance of disrupting the economy. Skeptics have time to protest, the usual mess of a capitalist democracy in action. Now, imagine the scenario down here. We chose not to take action on climate change, and it ended up happening despite what anyone's opinion was. A world full of natural disasters. Will we just sit there and take it? No. If we're getting battered and bruised, we're going to do something about it quickly and in a panic. Extreme things, maybe even draconian things, because our coastal cities are flooding. So if planned, controlled action up here is bad for the economy, how much worse for the economy would panicked, harsh action down here be? An economy which has already been battered by disaster after disaster in a destabilized climate and has fewer natural resources like croplands and predictable growing seasons. Up here, you've got negative economic consequences and anything that flows from that. Down here, you've got all of that, every bit of disaster scenario that the individual lay blogger wants to conjecture up here. You've got all of that down here, plus a bunch of bonus features. So no matter what feasible worst-case economic scenario we grant up here, it is included and made worse down here. So we've made a very conscientious effort to find credible worst-case economic scenarios that spell disaster up here, and we haven't come up with much. But it turns out we didn't need to, because necessarily this down here will be worse than this, because it includes all of it. Let's now look at that other big negative consequence on the board where we chose not to take action, or we debated too long, same thing, and human-caused global climate change turned out to be true after all. Here, our feasible worst-case scenario gives us political, social, environmental, public health, and economic catastrophes on a global scale. Sea levels rise 20, 30 feet, entire coastal countries disappear, hundreds of millions of refugees displaced, pushing in on each other, causing widespread warfare over scarce resources and ancient hatreds. Entire forests die and burn, massive floods alternate with killer droughts. The breadbaskets of the US and Russia turn to dust bowls, leading to catastrophic famines and dreadful epidemics spreading like wildfire. Storms like Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Mitch are the norm, plus all the economic disaster from up here, exacerbated by haste and natural disaster down here. We're talking a world straight out of science fiction, a world that makes Al Gore look like a sissy Pollyanna with no guts who sugarcoated the bad news. If the statements from the experts like AAAS, NAS, and USCAP aren't enough for you in deciding which column is better, just give your common sense a chance. Which situation sounds like it would do more damage to the economy? Government spending and regulation up here, or a world halfway to Mad Max Thunderdome down here? Watch the video, How It All Ends, Scare Tactics, if you want details for how these disaster scenarios might come about. So let's recap and then we can apply the expected value calculation.